Hello and welcome back to another episode of DSA's Life by Design. I'm your host, Arthur Cade, and I'm here with my co-host, Amanda Arconi. Amanda, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Today, our guests are Pennex Insurance, powered by Villanova Insurance Partners, the team behind this whole thing. I got to ask you guys, we've got Victor D'Angelo, Joe Denler, and Leah Check joining us. I want to ask you guys, why do designers need insurance?
Well, first of all, first party property coverage, if you have any property, typically designers don't have a ton, but they could have stuff that they use for work. They could have desk chairs also in their office, all those things. So you want to cover those things. But the major areas where they're really exposed is liability, third party liability. And those are causing property damage, causing bodily injury, or giving advice that causes somebody a financial loss. And that's what we cover under our professional liability endorsement.
While we're talking about liability, as a new designer, I obviously was out and looking for coverage for my own business and obviously reached out to you all because I'm a member of the DSA. So I was looking at obviously professional liability policy. I was also looking at errors and omissions and product liability, just because we are oftentimes a middleman with some of the products that our clients end up taking into their home. So what are your thoughts on that?
The product liability is covered under the GL. What's called comprehensive general liability policies have a spot on the line when you see the limits, and one of them is products completed operations. So you do have products. We do contemplate that when we're rating general liability, because we know that some designers can potentially sell, or even we actually rate it as almost like a store. They could have a potential of a store or selling things like a store. So the products are covered on our policy. You would always want to look to make sure that whatever coverage you had didn't have a product liability exclusion.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you for that.
So Joe, Lee, and Vic, how did this all come about? When did you guys determine that there was a need for this product and then build it?
We offer risk management tools. So to try and keep you out of trouble, we offer you the products we were just talking about, which is a business owner's policy with professional liability. And then we settled the claims as well, because we have our own captive insurance company. And so everything's done in one house, essentially. Joe, you want to add to that?
I was a litigator for 20 years before I joined Villanova Insurance Partners. When we built the company, we had Elite MGA was our main company that handled most everything in terms of programs. And I had developed a defense practice representing real estate professionals in litigation matters. And that's pretty much all I did, that and construction defects. So I had a relatively good handle on residential construction. And I started representing home inspectors and real estate agents and appraisers. And I did that for about 20 years. And I developed some ways to make these defenses on these claims a lot easier on the insureds, on the professionals, and on the insurance companies. And so most of my work was for insurance companies. I was the lawyer that your insurance company would hire to represent you if you got sued. We built a company related to home inspectors, and we decided, why stop there? And then it was there that we partnered with Pennex and Judy Phobes, who really helped us develop and push this over the line in terms of stagers, designers, and decorators in that end of our business. And now our partnership with DSA, where we try to specialize on these lines of business. I think that the disconnect a lot of professionals have with their carriers is that those carriers, they're not writing insurance particularly for this line of business. To the big insurers, designers, stagers, home inspectors, appraisers, they're all miscellaneous professional liability. We developed a way to focus on these particular lines of business and look very carefully at the things that come up in your daily life that could impact you from a claims perspective and that can impact your business and its viability. And so that's kind of what we bring to the table now, as a comprehensive view of the entire thing from soup to nuts. So you have the people in our office that help you select the insurance and everything that goes with that. And then my department is there for the rainy day. And in my department, what we provide is a more holistic view of claims management. We try to prevent them. Ironic, I know, but we do. What we try to do a lot of times is help our insureds understand the risks that are out there for them. And Victor did a great job at going through all of those. And when Amanda was talking about the types of insurance she was looking at, the errors and omissions, that's when you make a mistake. The general liability and the product's completed operations, that's for the everyday things that you might come upon as a professional entering people's homes, as Victor said. But my focus is almost entirely now helping our insureds predict what things might become claims and insulate against them.
And then Leah, where do you fit into this equation?
I come in the area of service, so I'm kind of the middleman between what Victor's talking about in terms of the insurance and then what Joe is saying from his standpoint as a risk management lawyer coming into it. So basically, I work with Joe and Victor directly to make sure that when I present the quotes and the insurance options to our prospects in the stagers, interior designers, and home organizers realm, they fully understand, one, what their insurance is going to cover, and then two, what like possible claims are out there and what we're doing on our end to prevent those claims from becoming something bigger down the line.
That's great. I actually had a little bit just as the interior designer here, and obviously looking at policies and getting my business up and running and making sure I do everything right. Obviously working with a lawyer, registering my LLC, doing all of the stuff and things that we don't really want to do, but we have to do, that we have to focus on. Some other questions that I had around specific policy related questions are around workers' compensation and how much responsibility does the designer have for some of the work that is occurring based on her designs that involve some of the workers that she maybe didn't even hire, but they're just part of the construction piece of this. So does that also, would that also be considered covered under that professional liability policy? I'm guessing that it sounds a little bit more like an umbrella. I know it's not an umbrella, and pardon me for not using the right insurance terms, but I'm just curious about workman's compensation, because obviously there's a lot of things that can happen when you're on site. So when you talk about stagers and inspectors, et cetera, I'm just curious to know a little bit about that.
That's a great question, Amanda. I feel like workers' compensation on our end is where the biggest misconceptions come in. People obtain the policy that Victor's talking about that covers their general liability, their property, and their professional liability, and they think that they're covered in terms of workers' compensation. But workers' compensation is actually a completely separate policy that is specifically done for yourself, your direct employees, and eventually your subcontractors. So what we find is that people generally don't understand that if you bring someone onto the job site that isn't covered or has their own separate policy, you take on that liability if they were to get hurt or, you know, seriously injured down the line while working on that job with you.
Okay, that's good to know. I was curious about that. And just an additional side to that too, would the homeowners require additional coverage? Should they be considering purchasing additional coverage when someone's renovating their home, having someone come in and do a large interior design job? Is that something the homeowner should be counseled on as well? What are your thoughts there?
It's an interesting question, Amanda. So there's a couple things there. So one, if there was major construction going on, they definitely want to tell their homeowners, not just from the increased liability, but because they might want to have to change their policy to a property it's called a builder's risk. So the homeowners doesn't typically contemplate major construction. If someone's just coming in and doing paint carpet, that's not a major issue from the homeowner's insurance company standpoint. But if they are, they want to mention it. The second thing is where they really, and a lot of homeowners probably fall short, so it's nice that you're thinking about them, is they really should be asking, I don't know how many of all of us who have people come on their property, whether it's cutting the lawn or painting, actually ask for a certificate of insurance and or a service contract between you and them that would indemnify and hold you harmless. So anytime you're bringing anybody, and it goes right down the chain. So if you're bringing, Amanda, somebody on to a job, a subcontractor, and I'll let Joe speak to this a little bit because this is his expertise, you should have an agreement between you and that person before they step foot on the property that you have that job at. And there should be certain stipulations in there about hold harmless and insurance requirements and so forth.
That's good to know.
Generally speaking, when we anytime you're going to bring somebody to the site, so this doesn't apply to anybody the homeowner is going to hire themselves and contract with themselves. But when you as the professional become the captain of the ship, you're not unlike a surgeon in an operating room. Ultimately you're responsible. As a partner in a law firm, I was always responsible for the people working under me, the associates, the paralegals, the administrative staff. It's the same thing for the designer who is running the job. And so anytime you have people that you're going to bring to that job, you need to have a written agreement with them for several reasons, not the least of which is you need what Victor was talking about was indemnity and contribution and defense. And what that simply means is that that company agrees to pay out any judgment or pay to defend you should some person, some third party be injured because of that subcontractor's work at the job in any way, shape, or form. Now, depending on the level of contractor you're working with, we generally recommend that you make sure they have at least $1 million in insurance coverage, particularly if they're moving things, furniture and things like that into a property for you. But you can control that and you can negotiate that amount of insurance that they have to have. But that agreement binds them to keep that insurance. It also should bind them to make you an additional insured under their policy because, insurance premiums are a business expense. And we never, as business people, want our expenses to go up because of the poor work of somebody else. And so the more you can not involve your own insurance carrier in that claim that you had really nothing to do with other than you happen to hire that contractor, then you want to make sure their insurance is picking up the tab for that, not yours. Why should your premiums go up? And so the other thing is when you have that subcontractor working for you, generally speaking, their policy is going to require that they have a written agreement with you before their carrier is going to indemnify you on a loss.
That makes sense.
Do these policies protect both professionally as well as personally?
If you're working for the business, certainly, while you're in the course and scope of your work for that company, you are covered for certain things. Some things aren't covered. A good example is sexual harassment. Any kind of workplace problem that might develop in your company, there might not be a defense for the individual there. But if we're just talking about a general situation where the designer, for example, is now sued in their individual capacity, say the client gets mad, they sue the designer, they sue your company, and they sue you individually. And we see this a lot with real estate professionals. Happens to lawyers and doctors too. They generally sue people individually. The policy will cover the individual as long as they were in the course and scope of their work for the company.
That's really good to know. I think obviously also going back to having a really good service agreement that's been drawn up by an attorney in your state. Sounds like that's an important aspect of this whole thing. Is getting
Well,
your
it
service
is. It is. It's so important, in fact, that we developed the whole program for every line of business we write, particularly the designers and stagers and decorators and home inspectors. Just as critical as the agreement between you and the vendor is the agreement between you and your client. Now, just as a matter of basic business best practices, you need to have a writing in place that shows what you're charging somebody, what you agree to do and what you don't do. If you want to ever be able to, for example, if you don't get paid at the end of the job and you want to be able to go collect that money, you need to have a writing. And if you want to collect interest on their bad debt, if you want to make them have to pay for you to pay the lawyer to go to court and sue them, that all has to be in a written agreement that they sign. If it's not there, you can't do that. And so that's a bare minimum, putting aside all the other things that go into any kind of arrangement where you're going to someone's house and performing services. There needs to be an indemnity agreement in there, just like it is for the third party vendor, because you're not in control of the site, your client is. You're there and you're telling people what to do and where to put things. But when the lights go out, you're not in charge of that site. When they decide to have guests over, you're not in charge of that site. And so the primary person in charge of that site should have the responsibility in a written agreement. We also include now anybody who's insured with us gets these agreements for free. And they are written by myself and my legal team here. And they're based on years of experience in this field, as well as with the legal aspects of what happens to professionals. And so there's provisions in there that limit the time somebody can sue you. There's provisions in there that limit the amount of money somebody can sue you for, or the types of things they can sue you for. There's a provision in there that specifically says you're not responsible for any third parties. All these things are things we all developed from the years of experience we've had representing professionals as their insurers, as their attorneys. We developed these because they are built in such a way to eliminate all the unknowns, all the uncertainties that you come up against in your business, in your daily life, all the things where people might do things to try to harm your business. we eliminate those as many as we can. And also, it's good practice to give your clients something that you can be proud of, that when they read it, they fully understand what the scope of your work is and what you're agreeing to do and not do. So there's no confusion later on. We felt so strongly about that we spent a considerable amount of time putting these together on a state-by-state basis, because we want to make sure our insureds have all the tools they need to insulate their business and themselves.
That's great.
So Joe, we've obviously talked about the designer end of it. What about the homeowner end of it? What is kind of their responsibility? Are they responsible for any accidents on the property?
Absolutely. Ultimately, under the law, the owner of the property, the party in control of the property, is always responsible for the conditions. Now, if in a situation where it's a home that might be shown, or there are business transactions occurring because of it's going to be sold, or let's say it's a new build and you're going in to design a new build and it's going to be sold, the person who owns the property, who invites people to the property for a business reason, ultimately has the main responsibility under the law to make sure the property is safe. If it's a business invitee, somebody coming on the property for business, the owner is expected to know or reasonably should know of any defects or problems in the property that may create a danger zone for somebody visiting the property. So ultimately, they're always responsible. A lot of times, savvy homeowners will try to push that off on the professional. We recommend that you don't agree to that, because again, you're not in control of that property. You know, you can't control when they decide to let their kids have a pool party and have 30 kids running through the house. Like, there's nothing you can do to control those situations. You can only control what you can control when you're on site. And so generally speaking, the homeowner bears the risk. Now, in our agreements we write for our insureds, we make sure that's very clear, that they are responsible. Now, if you are bringing things to the site as part of your work, and I know this doesn't always apply to designers, but it does sometimes. If you're bringing things to the site, that's an additional level of control, because now that's your stuff in somebody's house and you're not there. You know, and there's no like museum security here. This is just your stuff sitting in a room. Somebody can spill stuff on it, they can destroy it, whatever the case may be. Then there's that extra level of, you know, these people have a duty not just for people who may have accidents on the property, but to secure the things that are there and to have adequate security. And there's a provision in our agreement that requires that the homeowner make sure the property is secure at all times.
Victor, in terms of doing this series, we've gotten to see the incredible work that DSA is doing. How did you become aware of the DSA and trying to figure out how to work with their designers?
Tasha Younce and I got connected and we had a great conversation, and I kind of explained to her all these things that we are doing. And we thought that it was important to bring these. See, here's the difference. I want someone like Amanda, who's in the field, to know. When you go out and shop, you said you were shopping, right? Typically, people, what they do is they call a broker. The broker then represents an insurance carrier, and that carrier may or may not settle a claim. They may not, and that broker has very little control over that. And what I explained to Natasha was, we're not here to just sell insurance. I mean, you just saw Joe speaking pretty eloquently about all the things that we are doing. As soon as somebody comes in, they get agreements, they get a service agreement, they get a subcontractor agreement, they get a hotline to Joe's team. So, and the insurance that Leah is working with the insured in placing and giving them the right coverage is going into our own insurance company that's really for you guys. So this is a whole different experience. And when I explained that to Natasha, that we're not really just selling insurance, we're trying to educate people. Joe does well, and I'm just sort of a side note, but Joe and I and Leah do webinars like this for designers, and we try and educate people. We do actual trade shows on these topics. The topic Leah was talking about, work comp, we could spend honestly probably a whole hour or two and all the pitfalls that you could go there. So we really consider ourselves advisors and consultants that not only we're not just selling you insurance here, you're in our program. And by the way, all the people on this video are right down the hall from each other. It's not like Joe is working on his own somewhere. We're all really in the same thing. We're talking every day. And so Leah gets a call, complaint. Hey, I have a claim, I need help. She's on the phone with Joe, and Joe can have a conversation in minutes. You're not just talking to some big insurance carrier in the sky. So I think all those things combined are the reason why when Tasha and I spoke that we thought this was meaningful for designers.
That's great. That's what interior designers need. It's nice to know that you can be more of a consultative advisor. Interior designers don't get in the business of knowing all of these things. So it's nice to be able to have someone to go to. And it sounds like, you're really kind of killing two birds with one stone, really, in terms of talking about the contract piece of it and the agreement side of it. So that's a huge value add, I think, overall. So that's great.
You had brought up workman's comp. Is that something that's necessary? Is it something that designers and their practices need to be thinking about?
Our team, I think, is always going to advise, because we're looking out for the best interest of our insured, that we're going to advise them to always carry workers' comp, because from a legal standpoint, as Joe's mentioned, like then they become liable for the injuries that occur on that job site for themselves, the subcontractors, their employees. So if that's not in place, then you're factoring in, medical bills and like those expensive, costs down the line of when an injury does occur. Most times I will have people call me that say, oh, I hired, my best friend's son, he's just going to move for us. Like, we don't need compensation for him. And I think that's when someone's seriously injured, at that point, like the relationship, although it brought you to that point to having the job, it kind of goes out the window because someone's really hurt. And so they're going to go after whatever they can in terms to get those medical, bills covered, because they need to take care of their family in that sense, and not just take care of the relationship they have with you, I guess, from the beginning, is what I would say.
Sounds like it's important to have then. That's a big one. And I actually didn't even think about that when I was originally looking at different policies to put on my business.
If you're going to bring people on the job, they either need to have their own work comp through and have a subcontractor agreement, or they need to be an employee and you have workers' compensation.
That's great.
Has to. Otherwise, just like Leah was saying, they get injured, all that relationship goes out the window.
So where does the process begin? I'm a designer. I want insurance. What happens next?
What I'm going to do is get on the phone with you and kind of explain to you how the process is going to work. Our goal is to always be as upfront and transparent as possible as to what's going on behind the scenes. You don't feel like you're just sending in an application and being left behind in the process. So you'll fill out an application. From your application, I'll be able to quote based on what the specific needs of your business are. Interior designers, as you know, Amanda, from being in the field, you're doing a broad range of things. Not every company is doing the same type of design or the same type of work. So we're really looking at the nuances there to make sure that the coverage you have is exactly what you need for your company, and not just oh, they're in this category, we'll leave them in there type of thing. So from there, you'll get a quote. And then typically what happens is we schedule a call, we go over everything in further detail. I answer any questions that you have. And then moving forward, I'm myself and a couple of our other team members are your point of contact for any changes you need. And then of course, Joe on the risk management end is, invaluable in terms of being able to answer those questions that come up with, the claims or pre-claims assistance, or just any concerns they have regarding those contracts that we've stressed prior.
Once you buy coverage, you get a welcome package, and it has those contracts too right off the jump. And then you also have the option, Amanda, actually to have Joe or his team of risk managers and lawyers review your if you decide, hey, I got this contract, I really like it, I had a lawyer look at it once, you can get a free review as well, and they'll just give you bullet points and things like that.
Oh, that's great. Wow. Great service. If we had a couple minutes, I wanted to touch on fraud. And the only reason why I brought this topic up is because fraudulent activity with third-party buyers. And I've seen an uptick in this with some of the interior designers that I'm familiar with, particularly here in the Northeast. I'm in New England. And, what type of policy, what can you do from an insurance perspective to protect the designer when you've reached out to a buyer to assist you in the process of sourcing, whether it's fabric or materials for a job, and they don't deliver? And it could be for a number of reasons, but what happens is a lot of times with interior designers, especially if you're a small shop, you don't have the buying power to go to some of the large vendors to make purchases. So there are third parties, there are buyers out there that will aggregate and do that for you. And there's some that do a good job, and there are others that are not. So how do you know, is that do we go back to the discussion of agreements?
Well, it's unfortunately in that situation, they're likely the party giving you the agreement, right? Because they're going to be in control of the transaction. So it's not unlike when you're giving your client an agreement. So it's going to be controlled by what's in their agreement. But even if the agreement's silent on it, obviously the main consideration and the reason for that transaction at all was you pay them and they provide what they're supposed to provide. And so once that falls through, they owe you at least that money. Now, that's where, in terms of trying to collect the money that is not just related to what you laid out, but also, all the trouble and expense. From the civil side, you could sue them for fraud, misrepresentation. Depending on what state you're in, there's probably a consumer fraud statute that could be used. Not nearly every state has one. And they're nice because for the consumer, they actually add an additional penalty where usually it's triple the damages plus all your attorney's fees get paid. So it makes it very onerous for the party who decides to act fraudulently. There's also criminal implications with that. It can be criminal fraud, in which case go fill out a complaint. And it's very likely, that those people would then have a criminal problem. Now, if you're not in the same state or country with them, as you can imagine, your ability to recoup is going to be severely limited. And so, if you've ever had the experience of buying something online and when it comes, it looks kind of like it did on the picture, but it's about 5 times smaller and is missing the electronic parts, or it's 2 left shoes. You might not find that person. You might not have any ability to recoup that. So my advice always is to our clients, deal with people and where they are. Because if you got to reach out and touch them, they generally need to be in this country for you to really be able to do that from a cost-effective standpoint.
Just so you know, from the insurance side, there's no policies that will pay you or identify you for a transaction like that's more of a civil or criminal thing that like goes on.
It's really important that you do a lot of research on whoever it is you're going to do business with. Look, in today's world, unfortunately, businesses sometimes go under in the blink of an eye, and maybe there might not be warning. I think back to when my wife and I were getting married, and the people who did all the dresses suddenly closed their doors and went out of business about a month before our wedding. And so my wife and her bridesmaids had no dresses. We had to redo all that within a month of the wedding. And believe me, I tried to sue these people with every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears I had, but they were bankrupt. What are you going to do?
Right.
And they probably knew they were bankrupt when we bought that stuff. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of ways to recover that. And if the company goes under, you're just a creditor in line with everybody else. So I always say, make sure you know who you're dealing with. And also, make sure that you know where they are, and make sure that you're on top of it from like a community perspective. Are you hearing things about this company? Are you seeing things in line or online? Are you in message groups with other people who do what you do, and are they talking about it? That's the way you really want to kind of stay on top of that relationship from a legal standpoint.
Obviously, this would make sense for a mid or large size design practice. But let's say I'm just starting out, just getting into the business, probably not making a ton of money, don't have a huge clientele. Is this something I should be thinking about at the moment?
The unfortunate thing about claims is they don't pick and choose when they arrive. They're it's kind of like the weather that way. You have 3 people here whose entire lives are dedicated to trying to predict when those things are going to happen and at what level of severity. And that's really my entire job, is forecasting what's going to happen to people over the next 3 years. And so there's no timeline for that. You can be in business. I've had home inspectors who were on their first inspection and had a lawsuit as a result of it. There's no way to predict that. But you don't want to start out on a bad foot. The worst thing you can do is go out there and say, I'm going to take care of this later on. Let me get rolling. Let me get some money in the bank. Let me get some bills paid. Let me get my promotional stuff made up. Let me go out there and shake hands with people who are going to refer me business. And then the insurance kind of falls off on the wayside. And then you have a problem. And when you have that problem, boy, that day you forgot to sign that insurance paper is really going to come back and haunt you. So I'm going to say to you that it it should be as important as everything else you do to start that business, from opening an actual corporation in a state to signing the lease on your building or buying your equipment. Insurance should be right there on the top of the list of things you do before you go out there and start working for people.
Amanda, I actually want to ask you, at what point did you start thinking about your need for insurance?
Right away, actually. And, some of that comes from my experience being a commercial banker and having to consult clients on different matters. So it is top of mind, especially just the idea that you're going to be walking into someone's home. You feel vulnerable, and so it just makes me think, it's really something important to take care of out of the gate as you're putting all of the other pieces together. And I think this is a great conversation. It's such good awareness that I don't think you can, talk about it enough, especially protecting yourself with contracts and being aware of fraud. And the last 2 years have been really challenging because in every way, in every industry, it's very different. The nuance is slightly different. But I think a lot of designers, especially if you're a smaller shop, and it's why I brought up the fraud piece, you get desperate and you go to find sources and you're trying to get a job done, and you maybe make some decisions that you may not have done earlier. So it's really just important to be very aware of what could happen. So it's a really good, this whole conversation has just been very, very good educationally wise, just on all the things you should be doing, what you should be on the lookout for. So I appreciated it. It's great.
Your expertise is in design, all right, or whatever the small business person is. You shouldn't be thinking about these things. That's where we kind of come from, a place where we want to be that resource for you.
And provide you a way to ask those questions before they become problems, right? And so that's why it's so important for us that we're available to our insureds 24/7. So if you have a situation come up and you call us, you're gonna get somebody in the claims department today. And it's going to be somebody, who's going to talk to you about it. And, you're not just getting a bunch of people who work for a company that are sitting in some office park in cubicles. Victor and I are the owners of this company. We do this on a daily basis because we care. And we understand that the biggest value we bring to our insureds is that personal touch, is that we're out there looking out for them on their smallest and biggest jobs, on their best days and their worst days. I think that's why we've been successful. I come from a family that lived and died by our small business. And so I know, intuitively what it's like to go through things as a small business. And we take pride in specializing in that. And then in the new business person who doesn't know and has nobody to ask and is floundering, we're there to help them, not just sell them the product, but we're there with you every day.
Guys, this was so incredibly informative and educational. And it's funny because as someone who was a financial advisor for a decade of his life and sold life insurance, health insurance, pretty much every insurance under the sun, you wouldn't think designers, they need insurance. But you do realize that in that industry, and just even hearing from what Amanda's story was, how important insurance is in the big picture, it's really great what you guys are doing with Pennex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really good information. I appreciated that.
Thank you so much to the team from Pennex Insurance, powered by Villanova Insurance Partners. Thank you so much for joining us on Life by Design. It was another great episode here for the Designer Society of America. And if you're a designer and you need insurance, this is the team to turn to. Thank you so much, Victor, Joe, Leah, and Amanda. Great time with all of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.